He point blank said that if I have to lay somebody off, I'm going to fire the manager because the manager didn't do their job to make sure that we had the right amount of work, that we had the right skill sets, and we had the right level of employment to match the need. So it was a manager's issue.
It's almost like the product industrial complex has taken over everything. You know what I mean?
We don't value customers as much as we used to. In my experience, that seems to have trailed off. And I always find that the companies that pay the most attention to customers and making them happy are the most successful.
And most companies don't want to give teams a chance to really, become the best version of their team. They just kind of are like, all right, we dropped all you guys in here, you better start producing, and be amazing on day one. And it doesn't work that way.
And it becomes the white knight kind of syndrome where this person is going to fix every problem we have, right? And they're going to come in, and especially if they negotiate a really good salary, the expectation goes up even further.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic Podcast. Today, our guest is Lou Schiavone, a longtime executive and senior leader. Lou has led organizations and divisions in all sorts of industries in his career. At times, he's been president, general manager, VP. He's had stints at some great companies too, like Xerox, HP, Digital Equipment Corporation, one of my personal favorites growing up. Lou and I got to know each other a little bit when we were involved in a GovTech company together. And I was always really impressed by his natural leadership abilities and just his skills in building great teams and getting the most out of them. And so I'm super excited to have him on the show today. Welcome to the podcast, Lou.
No, thank you. Thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like I said before, I'm honored to be here. So thank you for having me.
Oh, likewise. I'm honored to have you. You've done some amazing things in your career. You got some great experiences, and I want to share them with everybody. Starting with, you worked at some pretty fantastic American companies, some great ones. DEC, Xerox, HP back in their heydays. And, growing up, I really idolize these companies and their ability to innovate, just that spirit of innovation they had and just the amazing cultures they had built. I mean, it was just amazing. These are the precursors of the Silicon Valley we know today. In large part. And so, Lou, what do you think made those companies really special, in your view?
So, it's nice to hear that it looked good from the outside, because from the inside, it was a wonderful place to work. Digital Equipment Corporation was an unbelievable place to grow up, professionally.
Right.
And because it was so successful in the early days, I couldn't stay in a job longer than like a year and a half. We were just growing. I'd be in a different office. I'd have different business cards every 6 months. It was pretty amazing. But the thing that kind of tied them all together was what, you mentioned culture. It was the culture of the company. There was a mindset in the company that you did the right thing, right? Digital always talked about doing the right thing. No matter what, when it had to do with the customer or an employee, you needed to do the right thing. You didn't have policies or edicts or mandates. You had just that guiding principle that says, no matter what, do the right thing. And nobody ever second guessed you for doing, what was right in that particular situation, even if it cost the company money or, there was an issue later on, follow on, but it was always about doing the right thing, and that applied even to the products. They put products on the street not because they needed to make a lot of money. They did it because it was the best product they could make, right? Which is a completely different mindset. It wasn't necessarily, and I don't know if it's good or bad, considering what we do now. But there wasn't a lot of market-driven engineering at the time. It was engineering-driven, right?
Sure.
I think you and I had once talked about the fact that, the product managers were, they were it in terms of the company. They protected those people.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that said, hey, this is what we're going to build. And a digital equipment corporation, they even went as far as to set up competitive teams in the design phase of a product. So they would have a general description of what they wanted to build or what they needed to build. And they would set up 3 or 4 engineering teams of highly talented, skilled people. And they would put their ideas together, separate of each other, and then they would all bring them to the table. And there'd be kind of a competition for who had the best ideas. And then there would probably be some merging of the better ideas from different groups. But it was all about making the best product. It was kind of like, you build the field, they will come. Ken Olsen, who was the CEO of Digital at the time, he always said, if you build a good product, the customers will find it. Right? We're not building to get a customer. We're building the best product we can. The customers will recognize that, and they'll come to us. And that was his philosophy.
It's kind of fascinating, Lou, that you have all these, in my world of product and engineering, you have all these frameworks for how to do product right. 20, 30 years ago, these frameworks didn't exist, and product was still happening. Amazing products were still being built. And it's kind of weird because we have all these frameworks now, but you don't see this in a lot of companies where they're just focused on solving customer problems. They have all sorts of other reasons why they would build products and so forth. But these companies, these early Silicon Valley and other kinds of tech companies that you worked at, they just got it. They just understood that this idea that if you were giving value to a customer, that was going to lead you to ultimate success. Right. They didn't need all these frameworks. What do you make of that in terms of how things have evolved from those days to these? I mean, there's still amazing companies doing great things, but there's so much it's almost like the product industrial complex has taken over everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, there's another difference there too. When you're inside those companies, and they talk about a strategic plan, they're talking about 3 to 5 to 7 years, right? When you start to lay your vision out for the company or your division or your organization, when they talk about a strategic plan, it's out there, right? You're building for the future. So you could make mistakes, right? You could do something wrong and kind of recover because you had that kind of a timeline. Nowadays, a strategic plan. I laugh at it whenever I go to a smaller company and they talk about a strategic plan being 6 months. It's like
that's not strategic. And
by the way, you have to have it done next week. That kind of thing.
Exactly.
It's just a completely different mindset and a timeline. So you had a different timeline to work on. You had the ability to make mistakes along the way. You weren't worried about driving value up so that, it wasn't the flip era, right? They weren't flipping cars back then. They weren't flipping houses back then. They weren't flipping companies back then. Now we're in kind of a flip, era. And so back then it was like, you're in it for the long haul. You're there for a reason. They treated, and that drove how they treated people, that drove how they treated customers, and that drove how they developed product. You were there for as far as you can take it. The value is in the longevity, not in the short-term wins, right? This is completely different than the way we look at things today.
Yeah, absolutely. What I find fascinating is, I don't know if you agree to this, but, companies, like you said, do think in a silly way about strategic plans being 6 months or even 12 months isn't really a strategic plan.
Right.
But what's crazy about it is companies will run the plan for that 6-month period or that 12-month period. they'll fail, and then the board will say, okay, we'll give you another chance next year, and they'll run another silly playbook and then fail again and then run it again a third year. So it's not like they're doing anything better. They just have this false sense of urgency. And actually, as you're sort of indicating, it just kind of ruins things. Whereas if they take a step back and think to themselves, okay, we have 3 years to do this. What are we going to do? You know, how are we going to really grow in the right way? Then they can take some sensible, methodical steps. But they've got this sense of urgency, and it's just rapid failures one after another. But it's not like everybody's getting fired wholesale. The teams still stick around, failing year after year after year. It's like flabbergasting. I don't know if you see it, but I see it all the time.
Actually, I've seen a lot of teams get fired.
Okay.
Somebody needs to be blamed for what went wrong, right? So I see that in a lot of cases, especially in cases where the leadership isn't what it should be. Where, you look for a scapegoat and somebody gets taken out. And when you're in a business for 5 years and your staff is turned over, 200% during that 5-year period, something's wrong, right? And that was never the case back at, Digital or HP or Xerox. It was about making sure that the employees were successful, a completely different mindset.
How do they do that?
They put people in jobs that they could be successful at, and then they supported them, right? So if there was a weakness in your skill set, that would be addressed. That would, you'd get a mentor, you'd get training. I went to school. They sent me to Duke, for a long period of time to kind of build up my skills in certain areas. And so there was an investment, just like they made investments to get the right product out. They made investments to get people in the company to the right level of skill to do the job and be successful. They also they looked at employees a different way than we do now. Whereas you would take somebody that had 90% of the skill set for a job, right, and you try to put them in a position, and you'd help them get that other 10%. But if they couldn't do that, you would look for places where that person could be successful based on their skill set. So instead of looking at the product description and saying, plug this person in, they would look at the person and say, where does he fit the best or she fit the best to deliver, successfully? And so completely different mindset in the way we look at things today. Kind of like job description, bang somebody into it. If they can't do all of it, there's something wrong with the employee, right? It's not that the job description is off, or, so that kind of thing.
And this is where I think people nowadays talk about companies not caring about employees. I think you're talking about the heart of that because of the way the mindset has flipped, where you're saying, just plug somebody into a job description. Before it was take a person, figure out how to maximize them and still add value to the company.
And I think about what that does to the employee in terms of the production that they actually, give the company, the dedication that they give the company, the commitment they have to a company that has their back. Completely different than things are today.
Right. You know what else companies are bad at today? Is they don't realize that teams sticking together for longer periods of time will produce some of the best results. They don't really, companies nowadays, it feels like they're not that good at giving teams a chance to gel and really get to know each other and align themselves, almost like a basketball or football team or something. Like really figure it out, and become this like amazing unit. It doesn't happen overnight, and most companies don't want to give teams a chance to really, become the best version of their team. They just kind of are like, all right, we dropped all you guys in here, better start producing, and be amazing on day one. And it doesn't work that way.
Plus nowadays you drop people in and out, right? So you're dropping them in for a particular function or a particular job that they have to do, and then you pull them out and you put them somewhere else. So there's no adhesion or team work that gets developed. You know, the one thing I remember from the digital days was Ken Olson, who, you know, he was my first CEO. An amazing CEO to have in terms of learning. And I think I mentioned to you that I used to spend time with him on a helicopter going back and forth from New York to Massachusetts. Only because I lived in New York and he would come to New York a lot for customer visits, and sometimes I would go with him and that kind of thing. And he used to hold managers accountable. If we had to lay off a person or remove a person from a particular job, he would hold the manager accountable. He always felt it was a management failure if there were layoffs. Because at the time, back in the 80s, we didn't have to worry about layoffs because we were growing so fast. We couldn't hire enough people. We used to bring them in from all over the world and put them up in hotels and that kind of thing. But when it started hitting the 90s, and then there was competition with the mini computers and that kind of thing, Data General and some of those companies. We were getting to the point where we were getting fat in areas, and we didn't have enough sales to kind of grow into it. And he was totally against laying off anybody. He just would not even consider the fact that we would lay somebody off. And he point blank said that if I have to lay somebody off, I'm going to fire the manager because the manager didn't do their job to make sure that we had the right amount of work, that we had the right skill sets, and we had the right level of employment to match the need. So it was a manager's issue, which you would never think today.
Nowadays, it's so funny. I developed this thing called a demand capacity framework, exactly what you're talking about. I wanted all my VPs of engineering to use this demand capacity framework, always align the demand to the capacity, always, 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 because in either direction, if you're off a lot, you're either like massively overworking people and burning them out, or you're massively underworking them and you have to let people go. That neither of those things are good things, but it's an important skill for managers to have, for sure.
And it was different in the way we looked at it way back when.
Yeah, completely different philosophy. You know, when you think about going back real quick to the cultural thing, after, these years you spent as an executive, how do you sort of define culture in your own way? Everybody has a unique sort of definition of it. But how do you, when you come into a company and you say, oh, yeah, this has a good culture, no, it has a bad culture, what are some of the attributes you look at?
Well, there's a lot of them, Bobby. The first one I would point to is the I have your back kind of a culture. Where you go into the company and you're not looking over your shoulder, you're not worried, you don't have a kind of a reaction to anything that happens, that something bad may happen to you. You're like a flinch reaction kind of thing. You're constantly flinching that something's going to happen. When it's stable, when there's outward signs and policies that are set up to protect an employee and to help an employee grow and be successful. That to me would start the culture. And then when you start looking at doing the right thing and making sure that the products are the best they could be, making sure that your customer support could be the best that it could be, giving people in the ranks the ability to make a decision regardless of their level. Make a decision that impacts the company as long as you're doing the right thing. Those are the things that kind of drive a culture to say, this is an unbelievable place to work, right? This is not, I'm not in a factory. I'm in a place where there's teamwork, there's camaraderie, there's caring, there's compassion for the people in the company, there's compassion for customers. I think one of the things that I noticed, because I was always in customer relations roles, right? I was a director of customer relations at digital for the company. And it's a big deal to me in terms of customer relationships. We don't value customers as much as we used to. In my experience, that seems to have trailed off. And I always find that the companies that pay the most attention to customers and making them happy are the most successful. Yeah. And it's the most rewarding as an employee, because if I'm stuck in front of a customer, with the company telling me I can't do something, even though I know it's the right thing to do for a customer, that's a bad feeling for me, right? And then I'm going to be in a position of the customer not being happy with me, which I don't want to be in that position ever. And I don't want the customer to leave. And, companies nowadays make decisions. I've always thought about this. Companies make decisions now, like layoffs and things like that they all know is going to hurt, right? But they don't think about it because there's never an immediate impact.
Right.
So if I lay off 100 people, I got 1,000 people company, I lay off 10% of the workforce. I'm looking good in terms of my margins. The board's happy. I'm going to make my numbers, that kind of thing. And everything's wonderful. And you really don't worry about the impact of that. But the impact of that ripples through the organization. It ripples through the customer base. And it's death by 1,000 cuts, right? It's all little things that go wrong. It's the perception of the company that would lay off that many people. It's the perception of the employees about the company, that they have to worry about their job security. It's just a different mindset. It's like you don't see the impact, so the executive level doesn't worry about it because the impact is so far removed from where they are. And I've always said this: when a customer or a customer base isn't happy, they don't quit today. They don't quit within a time frame where you would recognize the
direct connection.
The connection to what you did and the impact. They leave 6 months, 9 months, 12 months later. Right. I've always described it as a wave. The wave starts, way out in the ocean somewhere. And by the time it hits the sand, you don't even remember what caused the wave, right? And that's a completely different thing too. We never faced those kinds of things at HP, at Digital, at Xerox, because we were always mindful of the immediate and future impact that those decisions had. Because I was worried about 5 years from now. I was worried about 3 years from now. Yeah. I wasn't worried about getting through this year and then getting into the next year and changing my whole attitude and plan. I was worried about long term. So.
It's funny. There's not a lot of management teams that think through the leading and lagging indicators like this. Like there's always a big lag, like you said, and you got to really think it through. And if you're going to do a riff, if you're going to do different things like that, the planning of it, in my view, is absolutely crucial. And if you can, sometimes it's a necessity, you got to do it, but if you can plan it out, there's some mitigation steps that you can take, obviously, and not just like let disasters happen. But like you said, it's like, well, you're not feeling it in the near term. So you're like, I guess things will be fine. Well, they're not going to be fine. Like a while later, it's going to hit you.
But if you're working on that year to year kind of thing, like you said, it may not bother you at all because you can make the adjustment going forward, the following year. Yeah. When you're working at a company that has a different field of focus in terms of where they look, it's their depth of field is a lot longer than the way it is now.
Yeah, I mean, startups, great. You can think of it in month-long cycles if you want or whatever. But most mid-market companies, I mean, I think they're way too urgent for sure, and it doesn't get them anything beneficial, I don't think.
I think you need to manage month to month. I mean, I don't think everything is long-term, right? You need to manage day-to-day, month-to-month. I really like the post you did the other day about taking the time to spend time with your teams and understand what they're going through and participate in those kinds of things. You need to manage like that. You need to have those day-to-day, daily interactions with the folks. But, long term, you need to know what the impact is going to be when you do something like that.
Yeah. I like the idea of, building great ELT teams and executive groups, and like really thinking hard about like the exact makeup and chemistry of that team and how it's going, what's best for the company, and how it should be formed.
I think you and I talked about this. You don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I never wanted to be the smartest guy on my team. I always wanted smarter people around me.
Right. 100%. You've been president of $100 million company. In your view, what is it that makes a really good management team? What are the elements it has to have? And kind of like, how should you, besides just the numbers, how should you be judging whether you have a good management team or not? Is it the advice they give to the CEO? Is it the big decisions they made? They're batting above some number, like how do you form a good management team, and then how do you keep evaluating it, whether it continues to be good or not?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think communication has a lot to do with it. Communication amongst the team, communication with the CEO, not allowing anyone on the team to not be accountable to something that they said they were going to do. Including the CEO. I would expect people that work for me to hold me accountable to something that I said I would do.
Yeah.
Having fear in the team of not being able to communicate like that is always an issue. Blending the right personalities helps. Making sure that you have the right set of skills, not in a person in a position, but, with the totality of the team. You have everything you need. You have different perspectives, where it's additive when you're having a meeting and you're having conversations, because you have different experiences from different people. You have different skill sets, and that all adds to the team. Allowing that to flow and not allowing one person to kind of dominate. I've been in teams where one person had the loudest voice. And it didn't necessarily have to be the CEO. It could have been anybody on the team, but they seemed to have the loudest voice. And that kind of drove, the whole behavior of the team. Being able to talk open and freely, both as a team and individually. I've always found it helpful to work side by side with someone, even if it's a separate project, or just go out to lunch and talk about things. It was just, you need to have a relationship one-on-one with each of the members, and then you need to have it as a team. So there's you talked about creating a culture. The team needs to have a culture.
Yeah.
What are we about? What is it that we want to project out to the employees? Because everybody's looking at that team as an example of, how they should operate, right? I've been on teams where we talked about sailing before we got on the call. I was on a team where we tacked so often. Everybody on the team was like over the sides puking, because you got so dizzy from the different changes and how we would move back and forth. Or we would kind of ride waves, like it would be exciting, and then it'd be nothing, and then it'd be, and you bounce up and down. And I think one of the things that an executive leadership team or a CEO or anybody in a leadership position needs to do is hold the course, stay steady.
Hold the court.
I never, from a personality standpoint, it's easy for me to do this because I'm about as monotone as you get. To hold your reactions to things, whether they're good or bad, within a certain bandwidth, right? You never get too high, you never get too low, because things are going to go up and down, the waves are going to hit, you're going to go bouncing up and down. Everybody in that organization needs to see that you're calm, that the seas are calm, that you're going to get through whatever that storm happens to be.
Yeah.
you're not going to change direction every time the wind changes, one way or the other. You're not going to bounce one way and then bounce the other way. That's the kind of thing that I think makes a good executive leadership team. And it's got to come from everyone. It can't just come from one person. It can't just be the CEO or president or whatever. It needs to kind of be a culture and a presentation out to the employees as a unit.
Yeah, exactly right.
It's really important.
Yeah. Which actually, this reminds me of this phenomenon that you see in some companies where they just have really high turnover in the executive ranks, and that creates the ripple effect that impacts every part of the business. How do you stop, if you're the CEO, how do you stop that from happening? How do you get off the turnover train, so to speak? Like, is there a way to fix something like that? I guess it depends on what the problem is, but in general,
you have to finding the right people. It's it's kind of a dumb thing to say, but finding the right people is so critical. And not finding the right person that you. I've seen in a lot of cases CEOs create a vision of somebody from the outside that they think is going to be unbelievable on the inside. And it becomes the white knight kind of syndrome where this person is going to fix every problem we have, right? And they're going to come in, and especially if they negotiate a really good salary, the expectation goes up even
huge,
further. Yeah. So, when you put all your eggs in baskets that may or may not be true, and then you bring them in, and then that fails, or they can't live up to the expectation that you created, that maybe they weren't responsible for, that you created because you had this need, and you said, oh, that person's going to do everything I need them to do, right? If I get that person in, everything's going to be fine. I've seen that so many times. So when you're hiring, you really need to hire people at their skill set and in the way they fit with the team, right? So there's circles and squares in a team, right? And maybe some triangles and other things. and you need to figure out where that person fits in the team and how they fit with everybody else, and whether that team, that mosaic of skill sets creates the right culture, creates the right environment, creates the right message to the employees, and then it creates the right skill set necessary to do what has to happen to make the company successful.
Right.
The one thing I don't take credit for any of my skills. I really don't. I've learned them from good managers and bad managers. The good managers, you learn what to do, and the bad managers, you learn what not to do, right? But you learn from both. Right. But the only skill I'll tell you that I think I possess is the ability to hire a team that would work cohesively. And it's not an easy thing to do. And
no, it's not.
Especially when you're in a rush. Especially when you have a hole and you got to fill it, and it's like, holy crap! I need to have a CFO. I need to have a COO. And then the first thing that looks good, the first thing that looks like a white knight, you jump on, or the first person that comes along with a resume that looks like, wow, this person is like incredible. When you jump on those kinds of things, when you take the fast bite at something,
that's when you can go wrong.
Do
you think that is there a way to build chemistry, or are you a believer more in like either the chemistry is just going to be there naturally or not? You can't make it happen in an executive team, running a company. I
don't know that you could build chemistry. I never thought about it in terms of chemistry. I think you could build teamwork. I think you can build, we keep going back to the word culture, but I think you could build culture. I think you could build, I used to tell people that work for me, I don't care how you manage. right? I want you to do your job the way you think it's best to do your job. But there's and for lack of a better term, personality, that I want the team to emanate. I want the team to, I want us to act a certain way, and professional, right? I want us to be professional at all times. I want us to be compassionate at all times. I don't care how you do your job, but these are the attributes that this team needs to convey to the employees in the company. That builds, that builds the culture. That builds the teamwork. It's not necessarily chemistry. When you all start behaving a certain way, it creates an environment where you know how to act. Right?
I like that defining the personality of the team, not individuals, which is really cool. Are you a big believer in all these team building kinds of initiatives and exercises for exec teams? I've been in ELTs where it felt like all we did was team building exercises, offsites, blue sky sessions, all these things. And then I've been in other ones where it was not at all run that way. There was no consideration for any team building of any sort, and you just got to get your job done, and that was about it. Are you on any one end of the spectrum, or do you think it helps or doesn't help?
Well, yeah, in the old days when companies had a lot of money, like Xerox and digital, and they would send us outward bound training where I'm like on a wall somewhere trying to figure out how to get off the wall, and I mean it was fun. It was an experience. Do I think it helps? Not really. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think having opportunities where the team does things outside of the work environment, whether that's donating time to a local charity, or doing something where you're talking and you're interacting without it being in a work frame, framework. To me, that's more helpful than going through teamwork exercises. If you're going through teamwork exercises a lot, that might mean something.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, 100%.
It's not going to be fixed by the teamwork exercise. Right. That may mean something else.
Yeah. It's funny because I usually am having fun at work. I'm usually, most of the time, the stuff I'm doing, it's exciting to me. So I'm always trying to get ELTs to have like working sessions, but in a good way, and that's a team building thing. I don't know if I like the philosophy of like, you got to leave the office or, conceptually leave the company to go somewhere else to go do the team building. Why don't you just do the team building about the stuff that you're working on? That's the fun stuff, that in theory. And so, and then of course, go for drinks, hang out, have good dinners, lunches, all that. So that's awesome. Be a human and all that. But if you can make an awesome culture, you can have the team building happen right there in your company about the work, about the customers, about with partners, with other people. I like that philosophy. The teamwork stuff hasn't really helped all that much, but I do like the charitable thing. I was in a company once where we had a very specific directive about making sure we did a certain amount for charity. That's a really good thing. That gets people, to bond at some level together by helping others. That I like. But generally speaking, I'm more on the side of like, yeah, maybe these team building exercises like Outward Bound aren't the most useful thing in the world.
Right. And the thing about Outward Bound and retreats and all those kinds of things, they're taking you out of your environment and you're in a completely different kind of mindset. And then you learn something, and that's great. And then you come back in, and it's like, well, how does that connect to this, right? Yeah. So to your point, if you're not doing it in the environment, I don't know how much you gain out of those outside the environment type things.
Exactly. And it doesn't really have to be like at the office. I remember one time, the first AWS conference I went to, ages ago now, really tuned me into a bunch of really new technologies that I wasn't thinking about as much. Stuff like that, I think, is awesome. You should go do stuff like that. It's these softer team building exercises I'm not sure might really help. Okay, Lou, a couple more questions for you on the sort of executive team level. How should people, there's a lot of people in our audience who are sort of directors of engineering, product managers, product leaders, maybe VPs of product, and they want to become the chief product officer, the chief technology officer, the CIO. In your experience, what does it take for people to jump into that executive level? What do they need to do to make that happen? Because a lot of people just get stuck and they don't actually make it into the boardroom, so to speak, you know?
That's a really good question. So I think the first thing I would advise is to really think about whether you want that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, some people say, okay, if I'm an executive or I'm a CPO or whatever, you know, that's a great thing. It may not be, you know, depending on what your comfort zone is. You may not want that. That may not be a job that you enjoy. You may enjoy being, you know, in the work every day and, you know, getting things done and creating accomplishments and that kind of thing. When you move to an executive position, you know, your job is really to help other people accomplish things, right? You're not, what you do is supportive. It's not tactile. You know, you're kind of in this, the locus of control kind of moves away from you when you in a management position. So the first thing is really think about whether or not you want to do that, and whether or not that work, that kind of work, is something that you feel good about, right?
Yep.
Helping other people. I play drums, right? And a couple of times I had kids come over the house and I've taken them upstairs and they wanted me to show them how to play drums, right? And I couldn't do it. You know, it's like I do it. I know how to do it. But to teach somebody how to do it is a completely different thing, you know, and to try to support them through that process of how to learn it, it's, you know, I don't have the patience.
It's a different skill,
like, yeah, it's like one left, right. How can you not get that? But so when you're in a management position, you're teaching people how to do things, right? You're helping them. You're trying to get them in a position where they learn, that they up their skills, those kinds of things, make their environment pleasant, kind of stuff. Completely different view of how you actually, you know, do your day-to-day job. So that's number one. Number two, I think the way you communicate and the way you present yourself is critically important. You know, they always say dress for the job you want, kind of thing. I think that goes beyond clothes, right? So if you want an executive job, you need to present yourself as an executive every day. Every opportunity you have where you interact with somebody, they're gonna walk away from you thinking, oh, that person could work at a different level, right? Because they act that way, right? And that's a really important thing. I mean, it's, you know, dress for the next job. You need to act like the next job. You need to kind of figure out what it is that an executive looks like, how they behave, how they think. So the communication and that presentation becomes really important. Communicating in a positive way and getting you know, positive feedback from 360 degrees around you in the job you're in now also helps, because then other people look at you as saying, wow, you could lead this, right? Taking opportunities to actually step up into a different level just to do a project. Doesn't have to be a promotion, but when an opportunity comes along where you could step up and do a job at a different level and then step back, take those opportunities.
Yeah.
The best promotions I ever got, which God's honest truth, had nothing to do with. I didn't do anything to force the issue. I had somebody come and ask me to take a role that I didn't want to do. I think it was digital. I was running through the ladder, right? I was a dispatcher, I was a unit manager, I was a branch manager, I was a district manager. So, I just got to go with this thing.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting in New York City, right, the biggest district in the company at the time. I'm sitting at the 17th floor right across the street from the World Trade Center at One Liberty Plaza. Got a beautiful office. I'm like fat, dumb, and happy. I get he was, I guess what they called him was the president. He was the president of the service organization, $6 billion service organization at Digital. And he calls me up and says, Lou, I need you to do this job, right? I need you to take on a project with Citibank. And it's a global project. It's they want to outsource all their desktop. They're like PC Utility. I don't know if you remember PC Utility, but
Yeah.
they were selling it as $100. You get the PC, you get the hardware, you get the software, and you get the network, right?
Okay.
And we bring all that. And so it was kind of a subscription kind of thing for services back then. Anyway, he goes, it's 66,000 seats. It's global. We can't find anybody to do this job. You're the best we have in terms of dealing with customers. And I was like, John, I'm not a project manager. I don't know anything about PCs. There were so many excuses I threw at him. And he finally said, I need you to take this job. So I took the job. That job led me to a position as a VP of global outsourcing. That one position, that project position, because I took it. I didn't want to take it. I took it. It turned out well. I wound up, wrenching myself up into something else. So when those opportunities pop up, and you say, "Hey, I don't know about that," especially if somebody above you is asking you to kind of step up and do something. Those opportunities are gifts kind of disguised that you may not realize at the time. And that happened to me a number of times in my career where somebody asked me to do something and I was like, why would I do that? And then I wound up having to do it. And it turned into something really positive.
Yeah. A lot of the hard jobs people don't want, if you execute on them and you do a great job at them, other people recognize that and then want to use you for other bigger things. Right. So that's definitely a way to jump into the executive ranks too. I think the second thing you were talking about is really important. This whole idea, when people ask me this question, I'm like, just start acting right now as if you're whatever, the CTO, the chief product officer, or whatever. Okay. That's that old, I think it's a Seneca saying or something like act to become, you have to start acting like it. If you keep acting like you're acting before, that's not going to work. You have to act in a new way because you want it to do a new thing. I think that's huge. The other thing also that totally resonates is this, like, do you really want to do this job? Because so much of being in the executive ranks is, it involves a lot of, frankly, babysitting huge parts of the organization, which is not for everybody, and taking care of people who have huge egos underneath you, who are in high ranks as well, some of whom are probably smarter than you. And how do you manage them? That's a whole skill set in and of itself. Yeah. Then there's like the administrative aspect of being an executive. You got to deal with all sorts of administrative headaches. So maybe now you're not building software anymore. Maybe now you're filling out the, TPS report or something like that. Right. There's a political aspect of it. There's so many aspects of it that I think people mostly only realize once they're in it. But if you can study a bit, if you can understand what this is really going to be like, then you can at least prepare yourself to some degree for making the jump. Okay.
To do that, I think there's a way to do that too, though. You could actually spend time with an executive that you trust, that could, mentors to me, stewardship, mentorship, big. And when you talk about those companies, Xerox and HP and Digital, it was part of that culture. Yeah. You always had somebody that you looked to, that you can call, that was at a different level in the company or a different position in the company. That person that called me to do the job for Citibank was my mentor at one point in time. So we had a really good relationship. But having a conversation with him to say, John, what is your job like? What do you do day to day? You know, how do I fit into that? What do you think I need to build in terms of skill sets to do that successfully? Tell me what your life is like, you know, on a daily basis. And that'll help you make that kind of a decision, because you're not going to be able to tell by looking at somebody doing their job, right? Somebody that works for you and sees you in and out of the office, they're not going to know that you're spending 10 hours on PowerPoints and spreadsheets. Right? They're not going to understand that. Because most of that's being done on weekends anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you can get, I mean, I was lucky enough to have several people in my career who I emulated in terms of their executive abilities and how they handle themselves and all of that.
That's so important.
Yeah, if you have that, I mean, you gotta for sure use that. I had one person who was like the consummate professional as an executive, never said a foot wrong, just was like to a T, so good at her job. And that person took me leaps and bounds, and if I had to figure it out all on my own, that's one example.
Well, I would like to meet that person.
Yeah, I'll introduce you to her. Yeah, she's a New Yorker like you, so you'll like her. But Lou, one more thing, you know, as we start to wrap up over here is AI. We can't have a technocratic podcast without talking about AI. I have tracked AI in the last couple of years pretty closely. And obviously, from a technical perspective, there's innovation happening all the time. That doesn't mean companies are adopting AI super fast or the way they should, or, you know, those things. But how do you sort of see AI maybe changing how companies run themselves? And do you, first, I actually even ask you kind of what you think about it. Is it the massive sea change? Is it going to be the massive sea change that people say is going to be? Or is it just hype? What is your take on it, just macroscopically first?
Well, I don't think it's hype. I think it's, you know, people look at it as though it's the second coming. I don't know if that's the case, because there's always going to be some technology that kind of comes in and changes the trajectory of where things are going. But when I look at AI and I look at the benefits of it, to me, it's all about analytics. So we're talking about being in a leadership position, right? Being able to read and analyze data. Say sitting on top of a company, there are lots of things going on. There are lots of reports being generated. There's lots of information and statistics that are at kind of being built all over the place throughout your entire organization, right? Disparate organizations have their own sets of spreadsheets and data. As a leader, to be able to look at that data, collect it, and put it in a format and come up with analytics that help you drive the business, that's a game changer from a leadership standpoint. I mean,
so business intelligence is big. Yeah.
Whatever else it does, to take all that disparate data and put it in a format. When I ran a company, you know, years ago, I had spreadsheets, and I'd have to dig through spreadsheets to try to figure out what the trend. The biggest thing I could do is trend something, right? Is this trend going up or is it going down? And that was my big analytics. You know, to be able to actually compare sets of data and come out with kind of a diagnosis of where things are headed or what needs to be tweaked or changed from a management standpoint is incredible. And then just the fact that, you know, it eliminates some of the things that we do that are pretty mundane. The hope that it gets rid of lawyers altogether. It's like,
that's fine.
That would be my favorite part of AI. But seriously, to have the ability to have the systems actually look at large databases and correlate things that matter, and then put them in a perspective that you can work with and act on, and change, you know, things in a better way. I'm totally sold by that. So I don't know the ins and outs. I don't know the difference between one versus the other. I know they kind of focus on different things, but you
Well,
think about a medical application and what that could do to the medical field. I'm teasing about lawyers. I always wanted to be a lawyer, but I never got there. But the work that they would do and the ability they would have to kind of look at case studies and case history.
well, it's impacting every field already, of course. What I think in typical corporate environments, obviously, business intelligence has been getting better and better over time.
Yeah.
So you see all these business intelligence tools that have evolved. Now with AI, it gets even better. I mean, it becomes incredibly powerful.
I think. I mean, I thought Tableau was the best thing in the world. A few years ago,
Tableau is a good example of it. Some of the newer crop. Yeah.
But now if you put AI in there and you create an application that kind of takes that to a whole completely different level.
Yeah. Well, with large language models, you can actually interact with something that'll let you have a conversation about the data.
Watch your podcast. I know about LLM.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, if you can have a conversation with your data for the first time, that's pretty incredible. You can't do that with Excel. Although Microsoft's going to try to put AI in, is already putting AI into Excel, but that's what makes it pretty great, is you can kind of have a natural discussion about the data and tell it to do something, and it'll automatically do it for you, which is pretty amazing. So the other thing about AI is when you look at it on a department by department level, I think every executive should be using it in their department, not just personally, and they should be trying to use it to automate as many things as possible. That sort of, in my view, makes it so that each person in their department, let's say it's a small HR team of 5 people or something, it really takes them from being just 5 people to, maybe they're using AI. You can get 50% more, 100% more efficiency out of the group. It's incredibly capable even today, this stuff, and it's only just getting better. It almost seems like every week and every month now there's a new release of an LLM. So Lou, I think
it changes the work, right? It changes the work it changes the work that you actually do. Where you look at it at a higher level, whereas you're not looking at a low level. So it gives you the ability to kind of take your own thinking to a different level. Because it's doing all of the base work for you, and you're not 100%. Spending time there, and you can spend more time really thinking about what you're seeing and what you need to do about it, which is pretty incredible. And I mean, in my career from 1980 to now, I've seen a lot of technology jumps. I mean, digital equipment created the mini computer, right?
That's right.
They created clustering. Clustering was, a digital thing. Ethernet, they were one of 3 companies that built the Ethernet. There's always been a change that people look at. AI to me is probably the biggest thing I've seen in the 40-something years I've been working. And I've been through a lot of change from a technology standpoint.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think in the last 10, 15 years, cloud was big. Blockchain maybe it has its uses. Crypto certainly is, but I think AI overshadows all of it. I think it's as big as the internet for sure. It's funny though how long it takes companies to adopt these technologies. And I wonder,
why is that? What's the issue with it? Is it a cost issue?
I think there's a number of factors that go into it. So if you're talking about certain industries, definitely regulatory and compliance is a factor. And in general, I think companies are a little hesitant about just dumping all their data into the LLMs and seeing what happens. Like they don't want to really do that. The other thing I feel is I'm not sure companies exactly know how to define it and then use it. AI, the word's flying all over the place. But if you're running customer support, what should you tackle first using AI? Should you just give automatic responses to customers from now on? Should that be your use case? Should you use it to onboard new customer support reps in an automatic fashion? I think people struggle in companies with which use cases they should actually focus on. And then I think it's a lot of it is cost. Like it's very expensive in certain cases. A lot of cases, it's very, very expensive still for companies. And I think companies just want other companies to do it and use it first as guinea pigs in their markets. And then they're like, okay, we'll come and use this later, you know? But I think this is a complete wrong mentality to have, because the power of it is too great. It's such a powerful thing that if you wait even the tiniest bit, you're just going to be left behind by your competition. Like they're just going to go way past you so fast.
The interesting thing you said was about the customers and helping with, CXM type stuff.
Yeah.
I would love to have that. We used to use knowledge databases, so you had this database, and that was only as good as the data you put in it. And it helped the technicians kind of solve problems on the phone. I would never take away the personal touch between a company and its customer. Mm-hmm. But if you could load them with the data and the information they need to have a successful interaction with the customer, that's gold. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's absolutely gold. Telling a customer go online and type in a question and we'll answer it. To me,
it's a co-pilot.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I think we're at the end of our time. It was a pleasure talking with you today, Lou.
Great talking to you. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I'm sure our listeners will have taken a lot from this discussion. So thank you to everybody in the audience for joining. I'll see you next time on the Technocratic Podcast. And in the meantime, keep the sharks swimming.